Do you remember anything about Richard ever losing any of his men?
And Richard had several casualties.
Right.
It was just constant. I mean, all of us did. I don't know if he lost more than others or not. He was a very aggressive officer, so there's a chance that he would have lost more people because he was very aggressive and moving to contact to engage the enemy. But I can tell you that his men didn't rebel against him for that because they trusted him. I mean, he was a tough little prick, but they like tough little pricks when you're in combat.
Yeah.
They don't want that, milk toasty guy that says, "Gee, I really don't know what we should do today."
Yeah. Rich knew what he was doing.
Well, you respect the hard ass, because that's who you want next to you when fighting starts. You don't want the little weak guy that can't make decisions and is not aggressive.
Yeah.
You want somebody like that.
You also went to the same Special Forces training camp, not at different
Yeah.
times as Richard, but just to give me an example of the physicality of it when you went through it, can you kind of picture how Richard at his size, like if you can tell me some of the things physically you did in the boot camp that would have been certain challenges for a man his size?
Well, Richard went through Special Forces training after he came back from Vietnam. I went through Special Forces training before I went to Vietnam. But it would have been the same type of program. It wouldn't have been any different. The only difference between somebody like me and somebody like Richard is the height issue and how much you can really carry. So physically, you've got to be able to handle the fact that you're carrying all this munition, and you got to take your rucksack, you got to jump your parachute, you got to do all this kind of stuff. That's a lot of weight to carry. You're going to exit an aircraft in a Special Forces training operation. You're going to be carrying generators, you're going to be carrying weapons, you got your parachute system. So you'd be jumping anywhere from 80 to 100 pounds easily. So that's a lot of stuff to carry. When you're only 4'9", it's that much harder to carry that. In fact, his rucksack, which you strapped on below your reserve parachute, it had to be close to hanging on the ground. For him to get out of the aircraft with his rucksack down here on his shins, that's pretty tough to move. The rest of us, it was maybe at our knees, but he would have had it down close to his feet. But so it's physically harder for him to do that. But I would have never even questioned his ability to do it because just from the standpoint of who he was, he's just tough, so
Right.
he could do it.
And you did some hand-to-hand fighting training and
Oh yeah, it's just standard Special Forces training. You actually start that when you first go in the military. It's how far you want to take that. If Richard may have taken a higher level of hand-to-hand training than I took, just because he went in after the war. For me, when we went into Special Forces, I want to say that they gave us all of the training, but we didn't necessarily have the time to move on to the more specialized training, which would have been advanced hand-to-hand combat techniques and things like that. Because everybody knew they were going to Vietnam. Everybody knew that. So they were getting you ready for that. But it was an advantage for me personally to have had Special Forces training before I went, because conventional Army troops, Richard would be included, were not necessarily trained heavily in night operations and patrolling and ambush techniques and all that. They got some training, but they didn't get the intense training that you got in Special Forces. So he would have got a lot of that when he came back and went into Special Forces.
if you can just give me a brief summary of Special Forces or Green Beret, what's the difference between him and a conventional soldier?
The mission is totally different. Special Forces troops are trained to operate always in enemy territory, always in enemy. You don't have a front line. The actual mission of Special Forces is to infiltrate into an area, whether by air, sea, or land. You infiltrate into an enemy country. You recruit indigenous personnel from that country to fight with you. You can recruit, you're expected to recruit up to a regiment, which would be about 1,500. 12-man Special Forces 18 recruits up to 1,500. You train them, you secure weapons for them, usually by resupply from outside. Secure weapons, you train them in the weapons, you train them in tactics, and then you're to conduct operations with them against the government and government troops of that area. That's what Special Forces actually does. So you're a guerrilla. By our terms, you would probably call us terrorists, because we were terrorists and trained terrorists. So that's what Special Forces really is. Conventional troops don't operate that way. They're not trained to do anything like that. It's more straightforward type of combat training. And they actually have front lines, and they have base camps, and they have infrastructure. Special Forces A-Team doesn't have a whole lot of infrastructure. It's them and what they call the SFOB, which is Special Forces Operating Base. And that's what they communicate with. Back in those days, we communicated by CW, continuous wave radio, which is, dots and dashes, Morse code. And everything was coded. Everything was crypto code. So it's a one-time code book. Use a page, throw it away, destroy it. So it was very, very advanced for its time. Now it's like bricks and rocks, but back then that was cutting edge stuff to do.
Last thing before, and thank you so much for your time. I was thinking last night, and the idea was, when I originally started doing the documentary with Richard, we talked about, well, what if we have to go up to where you live, Stanford, would you go? And he said, yeah, I'd go. I said, what if we got enough money and we had to go to Thailand or Vietnam, would you go? He said, Thailand, yes, probably not Vietnam because I got too many enemies there. That would remember him because of his height. But I was thinking,
probably.
He's right about that, huh?
It's possible because of his height. I mean, that's exactly right. They never saw an American that small.
Yeah, he actually told me that he always felt safe in Vietnam because he thought they would mix him up with a Vietnamese from a distance, that they wouldn't shoot him.
That's possible.
Yeah, and he said also that they calibrated their...
He was shorter than the Vietnamese.
Yeah, he said that they calibrated their rifles at a certain height and that usually go over his head, so he felt pretty safe out there.
Well, most of them were bad shots anyway.
Yeah. Bad eyesight, huh?
That's one thing about an AK-47. AK-47 being an automatic rifle the way it is, and, I think a lot of people that use an AK-47, even nowadays, they tend to just put a lot of rounds downrange. They don't really aim that much. Where American military training, ever since probably the Revolutionary War, and even more so in this last century, is on marksmanship. And we were really heavily graded on marksmanship. Not all armies do that, especially guerrilla armies, militias and things like that. So you see these guys that give you an AK-47, they show you how to take the safety off and go have at it. But Americans have to pass pretty strict marksmanship training. And so when we shoot, we tend to hit what we shoot at. Yeah. We don't try to put a whole lot of rounds down range.
Spray and pray, I guess.
Yeah, we don't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, some guys do, but
Yeah.
the smart ones actually aim at the enemy.
So if Richard would have gone with me, if he was alive today, and he would have gone with me and he would have came here, what do you think would have happened if he was here at this event?
Oh, wow. I can't even imagine. I guess, I mean, he and I communicated back and forth a couple times over maybe the last 10 years. He would send me letters, and I would send him a note back, a little back and forth. But he wanted me to come see him, and I never went down to see him. Because he'd say, well, you come down to Miami and we'll hang out, we'll do this, And I never really went down there because I still had kind of a, I don't know about Flaherty stuff, Because I always thought he was a little on the edge, and I thought, well, I don't know if I want to go hang out with Flaherty again, because we weren't always on the friendliest of terms. But if he would come here, I would certainly enjoy talking to him again, because I think we've all had situations where you got on the bad side of somebody, or you had a dispute over there during the war, and then you run into that person 20 years later, and things have totally changed. I actually had a battalion commander come up to me that I used to butt heads with all the time. 20 years later, he comes up to me at a reunion here and apologizes to me for the way he acted. I know, what was that about? I was going, wow. And Richard probably would have the same thing. I'll tell you, he'd draw a crowd.
Yeah.
Richard would draw a crowd because people would recognize that little guy there, and they go, oh, I remember him, even if they weren't in his unit. Because if you talk to people that were in the 501st Infantry, and you just mention Richard Flaherty, every once in a while you run into a guy who goes, yeah, I remember him. He's that little officer who was over in Charlie Company. or he was that little recon platoon leader. They didn't know him, but they knew of him.
Yeah.
Now, whether they said that about me, I doubt it. But everybody knew Richard. He stood out.
He would have been a star here.
Yeah.
And any idea why you think he reached out to you 10 years ago? It's kind of a weird thing. You guys never.
I'm not even sure how he found me, to tell you the truth. He might have talked to somebody that knew me, and he said, Rick's up in Tampa.
But what do you think his motivation was?
It might be one of those things like a lot of us get where we say, well, we want to make the wrong things right.
Yeah.
Get over it.
Make peace, yeah.
Yeah, get over it, make peace, and that's it.
Yeah.
I don't have any animosity to people anymore. I've had disputes with some other officers, for example, due to what I didn't like about them during the war, and in most cases, we've worked it out.